Hi friends, welcome back to Art Class 2 on our project that we're working on, Paper Jungle. Remember, this is a series of 4 lessons that need to be viewed in sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4, to follow along with me as we do this project together. And so the project that we're working on is a collage based on the style of the French artist Henri Rousseau. So for our first lesson, that's what you need to have today. Your output from the first lesson, which was a piece of blue 9x12 construction paper and the brown trees that you cut out. And so additional supplies you need for today: a pencil, an eraser, a good pair of scissors. You'll need a few sheets of construction paper in varying shades of green. And then if you can get some scrapbooking papers, and these can be smaller pieces and certainly you can share all kinds of shades of green, even some patterns. And you know what, friends, you might even be able to use wrapping paper, wallpaper, anything that you have that's like a paper that is a shade of green with some kind of pattern texture, a variety of solids. And that's what you're going to need for today. Now, we're working on this project based on Henri Rousseau, and our first lesson we learned that he was a naive painter. That means he didn't have any formal training. He painted in his spare time, and his favorite subject matter was jungles because he loved to visit the botanical gardens in Paris on his lunch break, and he saw such amazing things there that it inspired him to create these really dreamlike jungles that took you to a different place. And so we're going to be enjoying spending time looking at a lot of different jungle paintings by Rousseau as our guidance for how we do this collage. Now, collage is based on the French word that means to glue, and so a lot of this project is cutting paper and gluing. Now, we're not going to get to the gluing until the very last lesson, but we have to spend a lot of time preparing all the elements that will make this a very rich, lush jungle. So let's get started on that. Now, I want to refer to our painting that we're using as our guide throughout all of these lessons, Surprised, Tiger Surprised by a Storm, to review some things that we know are important components of our collage. So let's look at Surprised. One of the things we notice about Rousseau's work is that it's very full. He uses every ground, and by ground I mean the 3 grounds that occur in any type of flat piece of art. There's the foreground, that's things that are seen closest to you, and so that's always at the bottom of your page. The middle ground, which of course is in the middle, and the background. You've probably heard of that word. Something in the background is something that's far away. So if I were to look at Surprised, I see that in the background, the top third of the painting, there's a stormy sky way in the background. What is it that's furthest away from the viewer? This middle ground is the busiest. In this middle ground, we see this big tree branches and this lush reddish flower that's blooming off this tree. Lots of different shapes and colors of leaves in this middle ground, filling up that jungle. And in the foreground, I see this tiger creeping into the foreground from the middle ground, this large dark bush down here, and you see all this big jungle grass that's kind of where the tiger's trying to conceal himself. And so it's very large and very detailed because it's in the foreground, so it's closest to you. Now, this is important to remember, my friends, when we're creating our jungle, because we're going to be working on the grounds, 1 ground at a time. Last time we were together, we started with our background. And so we haven't glued anything yet. We've just started by having our structural elements, and that's the trees that kind of anchor the sides of our composition. Well, now we want to work on the middle ground and foreground elements. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to start with a basic piece just to get you started in the foreground. And that's a run of grass. So what we're going to be doing, just like we have this big jungle grass in the foreground of Surprised, we're going to be making a long stand of grass that is continuous. In other words, they're not individual blades of grass, but it's all one big piece. So let's get started. I'll show you what to do. Take a piece of construction paper, whatever shade of green you like. I'm going to use this medium green. And you're going to fold your paper hot dog style. Do you know what that means? Like a bun. Hamburger style would be if I folded it this way, short end to short end. That's like a hamburger bun. But I want to fold it hot dog style, long end to long end, like a hot dog bun. So fold it hot dog style and crease it. And what you're going to do, friends, is the folded edge is going to be away from you. Now I can see on my background paper that this would fit right across the bottom because they're the exact same size. And that's what we want. So I'm going to create a continuous stand of grass all across, and then we're going to cut it out. Now here's what I want you to do. I don't want you to rush, because if you rush, you're going to wind up making blades of grass that all look exactly the same. But we know from looking at Rousseau's work that there was so much variety, so much detail. He cared about every blade of grass. So that's what I want you to do. So you're going to start from the bottom, this very bottom edge, and you're going to draw a nice, tall, narrow point like a sword. But don't come all the way down. Stop when you're about 1/2 to 3/4 inch from the bottom. And see, this top folded edge is your barrier point. So this is as tall as all the grass is going to be. But they don't all have to reach up there. So now I'm going to continue from that point, but I'm going to make this blade curve a little and maybe a little thinner. And then I'm going to make this blade not quite as tall. Do you see what I'm doing? So I'm not going all the way to the bottom. I'm keeping them connected, and I'm making blades of grass. This is my jungle grass, that are a little bit different. I'm making them big, so you don't want to make little tiny blades of grass. You want to use this full size because the foliage in Rousseau's work was always oversized and kind of weird in scale to the animals and people he had in it. So now this blade is going to bend up this way, like so. So some are going to be skinnier than others, and some are going to be thicker than others, and some are going to be more rounded. So it's all going to look a little different. So keep going all the way across, my friends. Remember, don't go to the bottom. And then until you get to the very end. So now I have this continuous run of grass. How did yours turn out? And if you don't like the way some of the blades look, that's where your eraser comes in. You can fix it. Now here's the fun part. We're going to keep this folded hot dog style while we cut so that we actually wind up with 2 runs of grass that are exactly the same. And this will help. You can actually use both in your composition, shifting their position a little bit to create more depth and interest as the blades of grass overlap. So now let's talk about cutting and scissor skills. Remember last time we were together, I recommended if you're left-handed to get a pair of left-handed scissors. It'll just make things easier. Now, some of my young artist friends might not have a lot of experience with scissors, so let me give you some tips. First thing I would say is always make sure the point of the scissors is always away from you. You don't want to contort and, as you're cutting, turn the scissors where they start to head towards you, because you could slip or someone could bump you and then you would wind up getting hurt, and that's not good. So you always want to be mindful that your blades are away from you. You don't want to have your elbows out while you're cutting. Some people get very contorted when they're cutting. Keep your elbows down and in and stay relaxed. And rather than turn the scissors, turn the paper. So this is a lot of deep cuts that have to go in between a lot of narrow spaces. So I'm going to take my time, and I'm going to be mindful of small snips, not try and do it all in one piece. And notice I'm turning my paper, not my scissors, to get down into this valley here in the grass. Small snips. I use my dominant hand is where my scissors are, and my opposite hand is in charge of turning the paper. Now I'm also not worried about exactly staying on the lines. We talked about this before. Because this is a collage and we're more concerned with the effect we want to achieve with the paper than how close we're cutting on the pencil line. I'm also not worried about keeping this piece that's the negative space in one piece. It's okay if there's little scraps. I just want to be careful not to cut down to this edge so that I can keep this as one continuous line of grass. So here's what I want you to do, my friends. You can be cutting your grass while I'm cutting, but since I probably cut pretty fast, if you need to pause the DVD, finish cutting your grass and then join me, you can do that as well. I'm already getting excited to see how this grass is going to look when it's our foreground on our paper jungle. Can you see how it's coming out already? Lots of variety. So turn my paper, keep my blade away from me, also away from other people. If you're cutting near a friend or a brother or sister, be careful that your elbows are tucked in and that your blade is away from someone. With anything where you want to achieve a skill, you need to practice. So if you don't have a lot of practice with scissor skills because you don't cut a lot, the only way to get better, my friends, is to cut a lot. So draw simple shapes. Try cutting them out. Use different kinds of scissors until you find one you're comfortable with. If you're a really young artist friend, make sure you ask a grown-up for the right kind of scissors that are meant for you. I am almost done my foreground run of grass. It's turning out great. So how are you doing? So now I have this long piece of grass, but that's not going to be enough, my friends, and it's all one color. So we need to add more variety. We know from looking at all of Rousseau's work that he has a lot of variety in his work. In fact, there's another painting I want to show you that's so fun, you're just going to love it. This is called Tropical Forest with Monkeys from 1910. Again, you'll see Rousseau had oversized leaves. In fact, everything's oversized except the monkeys. The flowers are oversized. See the patch of white ones on one side and gold on the other? And it's so fun because the monkeys, so playful, look like they're at a standstill, like they've stopped playing just to look at you looking at them. And here we have our two stands of grass. So when it's time to do our foreground, I will lay one this way. And since I don't want to put the one that looks exactly like it right on top, there's a couple things I can do. Because these are really reversible, I can reverse it and you can see I have a lot of variety in the way that looks. Or I can stagger it where the one that's behind is taller. And that provides us with a lot of variety and texture for our foreground. Okay, so we've seen now with Surprised and with Tropical Forest with Monkeys, there's a lot of variety with the leaves. So now we have to work on that piece, and that's going to be the primary component for our middle ground. And this is where it's going to take some time, but you have total control of how much you want to do. So look at all these leaves I brought with me. Now, your inspiration could be right outside of your door. But maybe you don't live where there's a lot of plant life. But really, friends, there's plant life everywhere. You just have to take the time to look. Now, this is a large leaf, but it looks like it has ribbing in it. And this is kind of a standard leaf shape. But leaves can be so different. Some have sawtooth edges on the side and are very sharp. You can see their veins very prominently. Some are very long and skinny. This one is kind of a reddish, rusty brown. These are kind of spade-shaped. And then there's leaves that have lobes. Maybe you have that near where you live. So because we have such a variety of leaves out there in nature that God created, we can make all kinds of leaf shapes here. And it doesn't matter if they're plants that really wouldn't be found in the same jungle. That didn't matter to Rousseau either. So I have all kinds of greens here. And I want to be making a lot of leaf shapes. So I think I want to start, though, with some basics. So I think I have this medium-toned grass, and I have a lot of varieties here. I think I'm going to take one of these darker sheets of paper. And here's the fun thing, friends. Fold your paper anyway, doesn't matter, because then when you cut out one leaf, you've actually cut out two. So you're saving yourself some steps, and also helps you to use your paper more wisely. So I'm going to start by drawing a basic leaf shape, But I have to think, Rousseau always made his foliage oversized. So I don't want to draw anything too small, even though this is a background, and even though this is our tree, the leaves that would be on this tree, they would actually kind of be pretty small, like maybe like this size. That's kind of tiny. Rousseau made everything oversized. So I want the leaves to be big. So I want you to think in terms of the size of your thumb. Whatever size you are, whatever age you are, that's going to be the right size. So your leaves should be about the size of your thumb, kind of big. So I'm going to draw just kind of a basic leaf shape, like a football, you know, with the pointy ends. That's a standard leaf shape. I'm going to do several of those right on this page. And fortunately, that's a shape that's fairly easy to cut out. So first, I'm going to just make my paper that I'm cutting from smaller. So if you have something small drawn on paper, but you have a lot of paper, it's kind of cumbersome to move around. So by making what I'm holding smaller, it'll make it a little easier for me to cut out. So I use my other hand to turn my paper for me, and I have a few leaves. Now this, friends, is a dark tone of green. I want to talk to you about tone and what tone means. Some people use the word shade, but in art world, the actual correct word is tone. If you were with me for Art Class 1, you remember when we talked about value, and value is the light or dark of something. So the very darkest value is black, and the very lightest value is white. But what about when it's color? Well, how do you determine the value of color? Well, now it's called tone. So, for example, this is a light tone of green, and this is a dark tone of green. So even if you have patterns, I want you to be thinking in a variety of tones. So even though that this is a pattern, you can see it's a darker overall tone than this middle piece of paper. So as you're creating a variety of leaves, also be thinking of a variety of tones. That's exactly what Rousseau did. So when we see all the various greens in here, and even the way he combined green with brown or gold, it's a variety of tones so that there's very dark and very light and everything in between in his paintings. So for the rest of this lesson, we're going to be drawing and cutting leaves. And that's going to take some time. Now, these scrapbook patterns that I have here are usually white on the opposite side. So we're going to draw on the opposite side. It's much easier to see. So if I wanted to do some more leaves, I don't want them all to be the same shape. So this is a standard leaf shape, but I want to try something different. So I can look for inspiration, or I can even make it up, because really Rousseau's jungles were dream sequences. And so not all of the leaves that he put in his paintings were things that he would see in Paris. Now, they might have been seen in those botanical gardens that were set up there, but he imagined all kinds of plant life that were really new and different to all the people who looked at his paintings. So if I were to do something different, I might do a lobed leaf. A lobed leaf is a leaf that has kind of like fingers. So I will come up and think of a baseball mitt, or maybe even a cooking mitt, anything that has like projections like that. So you can make leaves that have lobes, and you can vary their size a little bit or how long the lobes are. You have the imagination because you're the artist. So I'm going to be careful to draw them somewhat close together so that I'm not wasteful of my paper. You never want to draw one thing right in the middle of the paper and cut it out. You want to keep things to the edge and try and nestle things together so that you're conserving. We want to be good stewards of our resources. So for example, there I have 3 lobed leaves on that paper. And now I'm going to cut them out. So this is going to take some time, my friends, to draw and cut a variety of leaves. Now, what do you think? When Rousseau first showed some of his jungle paintings, people were so surprised. What was he thinking, they thought? He's just a customs officer. What does he know about jungles? And Rousseau told a story that he had been in the French Foreign Legion and served in Mexico, and that his inspiration were the jungles of Mexico. Well, that wasn't exactly true. See, most historians believe that Rousseau had never left France at all. He'd never served in Mexico. He'd never seen a jungle in the wild. His jungles were all what he imagined after visiting the Botanical Garden in Paris. But he wanted to tell a story. And my friends, that's what most art is. The artist is trying to tell some kind of story. It doesn't need to be a complicated story. It could be a portrait of a friend, but you're telling a story about that person. And in the case of the jungle, I bet you could come up with amazing stories if you look at a Rousseau painting. So in Surprised, Tiger Surprised by a Storm, he was telling the story of a tiger that was on the hunt for a prey. We can't see the prey. They're probably outside of the frame. And what happens? A storm comes up, and the lightning starts to strike. And you can see the wind is blowing. It's blowing these branches. It's bending over the grass. But he's still on the hunt. So he's telling a story. Here's the thing that I think is so cool. You know, Jesus did that. Jesus used a lot of powerful imagery to tell a story, and they were called parables. And I think we can learn so much when we look at the parables of Jesus, because he knew that people didn't have a lot of wide experiences. Most of the people that Jesus was talking to in that time just lived and worked right there, and they just went about their daily lives. But Jesus wanted to make sure they really understood the right way to live. And so he used word pictures with things they could really understand, which is why the parables deal with things like figs and olives and sheep, because that was what the people knew. In fact, one of the parables is my favorite that I wanted to share with you, and it's in the book of Matthew. This is Jesus talking, and he says, "The nations will be gathered in front of him, and he will separate the people into two groups. He will be like a shepherd who separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep to his right and the goats to his left. And then the king, he will speak to those on the right, and he will say, 'My Father has blessed you. Come and take what is yours. It's the kingdom prepared for you since the world was created. I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you gave them to me. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me.' And then the people who have done what is right will answer him, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you? When did we see you thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you as a stranger and invite you in? And when did we see you needing clothes and give them to you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?' And the king will reply, 'What I'm about to tell you is true. Anything you did for one of the least important of my brothers of mine, you did for me.' And then he will say to those on his left, 'Depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat, and I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in, and I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you didn't look after me.' And they will also answer, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty, or as a stranger, or needing clothes, or sick or in prison, and did not tend to you?' And he will reply, 'Truly I tell you, whatever you did for the one of the least of these, and whatever you did not do, you did not do for me.'" Jesus was using that example of the separation of sheep and goats. Sheep were very valuable in that time, to say those who look after one another are really serving Jesus. But those who don't look after their friends, they're disappointing Jesus. Boy, I want to be a sheep. I don't want to be a goat. How about you? I want to be a sheep that pleases my Lord. So this parable of the sheep and the goats is an important one for us to remember, that we're to serve everyone as if we're serving Jesus himself. That's why I love the parables and the great stories they tell. Now, I don't know if Rousseau knew Jesus, but I do know that he was trying to tell stories in his paintings, and they weren't always exactly true depictions of something he'd seen, but they were things that came from his mind, and with his talent, he wanted to share it with other people. So, friends, what you're going to do now is after this lesson is over, before we meet again for lesson 3, you need to have a wide assortment of leaves. In fact, I would love it if you could have more than you think you might even need, because we want to fill this dense jungle very richly with a lot of foliage in that middle ground and behind the grass in the foreground. So as I cut out this last lobed leaf, and this is simply 2 colors and 2 tones, and I want to have quite the variety. Now, if you are working with some friends or some siblings, you can share a lot of these papers, right? So hold on to those, even if you've cut something out, because a friend or a neighbor can use the other parts of the paper. You always want to be good stewards of what we have. You can see how this is a totally different shade of green. I'm going to work on that one next. And I'm going to draw a different kind of leaf shape. And I'm going to keep on going so that I have a nice pile of leaves, variety of sizes. So these are all about, they're kind of wide, right? So I think next I want to get something that's kind of long and skinny. So I'll just real quickly draw some really long leaves as we wrap up here lesson 2. And I hope you'll join me next time for lesson 3 when we add in even some more interesting elements that we find when we look at all the amazing jungles of Rousseau. See you next time.